Ghost of Virginia. Gonna read you another story. The dream that convicted a murderer in Blue Ridge Mountains. It occurred in 1879 in a sparsely settled region of the Blue Ridge Mountains, some miles south of Virginia line. A young farmer named George Feller and his wife were trying to eke out a living on their rock strewn farm. It was a tough go. Kathy Feller suffered severely from chronic asthma, which often rendered her bedridden. The neighbors were all familiar with her condition, but there was, in that day, little to be done. Then early one morning, George pounded on the cabin door of his neighbors. He was distraught, tears streamed down his ruddy cheeks. His wife, he stammered, had had a terrific asthma attack the previous night and was having difficulty breathing. He feared she was going to die. The neighbors rode back with him to his ramshackle house. They found Kathy dead in her bed. As there was no doctor nearby and no death certificate required, and since everyone knew of Kathy's delicate condition, it was readily assumed that she had perished from her punishing illness. Women prepared the body for burial without question, and the men fashioned a wood coffin. Neighbors gathered from miles around as the custom for the wake attended by the region's preacher. The coffin was set on a 2-horse wagon, and mourners followed it on foot, winding down the foothills to a little cemetery 4 miles away. Then a most strange thing happened. Halfway there, the funeral procession was suddenly halted by a strange man on horseback. He blocked the trail and then said, to the shock of all that are present, that they could not bury this woman. She had been murdered, he declared. The mourners were stunned into silence. The man then said that he didn't know any of them. He was from a neighboring county. But I dreamed last night that I was on my way here and I would meet a funeral procession with a coffin containing a body of a woman who had been killed by her husband. This is just the group I saw in my sleep, the same wagon, same coffin. Unless you have an examination made, I am going to report this to the law. No one knew what to do. They looked at George, and he seemed totally bewildered. What did this extraordinary intrusion mean? What was this stranger talking about? The mountain people in that era were still poorly educated and highly superstitious lot. They believed deeply that dreams were important and carried a specific meaning. How, they asked among themselves, could this man have known they would be winding their way down the little cemetery on this particular day? How did he know the body of a young woman was in the coffin? And why was George not staunchly protesting this rude interruption? After some discussion, the mountain folk finally decided that maybe they should have the body examined. What harm would it do? And now, after this bizarre incident, if Kathy were buried without at least a cursory investigation, wouldn't that leave nagging questions and doubts? It was then decided to detour the procession away from the graveyard toward the county seat, where a doctor could quickly resolve the matter. Oddly, this met only with mild objections from the befuddled George. Another shock came at the door. After careful examination, he stated, indeed, Kathy had died of strangulation, but not that caused by an asthmatic attack. Rather, she had been choked to death from the outside of her neck. Curiously, there was no telltale signs, bruises on the neck, but the doctor said the evidence showed the pressure applied that had been smooth and even over a wide area of her throat, and because of her weakened condition, not a whole lot of pressure it had been necessary. At this news, George Feller began to act suspiciously. When he talked, the details of the night before his wife had died became confused and began to conflict. He was no longer tearfully sad. He seemed scared. When the doctor reported to the sheriff, George was held in the county jail until things could be straightened out. The sheriff and the local justice of the peace then drove their buggy to the Feller cabin and conducted a search. Inside a homemade chest in the bedroom, they found a broad band of rawhide. Embedded in this piece of leather were strands of blonde hair. Kathy was a blonde. Was this the weapon that had been used to strangle her? The sheriff thought so. When the sheriff showed the rawhide to George, he collapsed on the spot and confessed to the crime. He said that he and Kathy had a big fight, and the previous night and that it had raged on for hours. Finally, he had snapped. He had grabbed a leather strap, wrapped it around his wife's neck, and choked her until lifelessness. When he realized what he had done, knowing that his neighbors were aware of her acute asthmatic condition, he decided to tell them she suffered an attack and had died. His tears had convinced them. But for the inexplicable dream of the man who met that funeral procession on the mountain, George Feller would have gone free. As it was, he was tried in court, convicted by his own confession, and hanged. And that just goes to show you that sometimes you have to listen to your dreams. Sometimes there's something in them.